Good morning, everyone. Grandpa Ron here again. Hope everything's going well for you. Everybody's well and happy. We've got a cold but sunny day here, and so it's actually kind of nice to be inside. We're going to continue our very basic Bible study today by looking at Genesis chapter 15. Remember in chapter 14 we saw how Abram had to go rescue his nephew Lot, and he used some military strategy and some of his trained men to do that, but it was ultimately God that gave him the victory. And we saw the introduction of Melchizedek, and now we're going to look at some things that happened after that. And because the time elements in many chapters of the Bible are compressed, we don't know how long after this rescue of Lot, this chapter takes place, but it's sometime afterwards, and we're going to take a look and see what happens. So let's jump in. Here's chapter 15 of Genesis, verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be great." Well, what would Abram fear? Possibly, if this happened relatively soon after these earlier battles, he might have feared retribution from these kings that he had defeated. We don't know. But God is telling him, don't fear, don't worry. I've got you covered. I'm a shield to you. And he talks about a great reward. Verse 2, "And Abram said, O Lord God, what wilt thou give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" So God has told him, previously that he was going to make him father of a multitude of descendants. So there were going to be as many as the dust of the earth, but still Abram does not have an offspring. And back in these times, Abram and his wife Sarai could adopt someone to be their heir. And so Abram is saying, what are you going to give me, Lord? Sons are very valuable. They're a blessing. You're cursed if you don't have children. And yet I don't have any. So what is it you're going to give me? Verse 3, "And Abram said, Since thou hast given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man will not be your heir, but one who shall come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." So God is telling him, oh no, just be patient and wait. I am fully capable of giving you an heir, and he's going to come from your own body. Verse 5, "And he took him outside and said, Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you're able to count them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be." Well, earlier he had said, your descendants are going to be as the dust of the earth. There's verses that talk about your descendants are going to be like the grains of sand on the shore. Well, the stars you could count back then with the naked eye would have only amounted to a few thousand. So sounds like a little contradiction there. It's going to be fewer than he had previously said. But I find this an interesting verse because now, centuries later, thousands of years later, science has shown us that the number of stars do number as high as the grains of sand on the shores of the oceans. And so it's one example of how God knew back then how many stars there were. Abram may have not have been able to count the billions and quadrillions of stars, but God knew how many, and he's telling him, your descendants are going to be a like number. So I found that interesting and curious. Verse 6, then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Well, this doesn't mean that Abram believed in him for the first time. It means he believed what he said, and Abram's continuing this lifestyle of obedience and faith and belief in God. And God, he reckoned it to him as righteousness. All through the Old Testament and New Testament, it's faith in God, belief in God, that yields a reckoning of righteousness from God. We'll talk about that more in the future. Verse 7, and he said to him, this is God speaking to Abram again, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. And he, Abram, said, O Lord God, how may I know that I shall possess it? Now, this is still showing faith on Abram's part, because he doesn't say, well, when am I going to get it? He's just saying, how am I going to know it? And so God said to him in verse 9, bring me a 3-year-old heifer and a 3-year-old female goat and a 3-year-old ram and a turtle dove and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him and cut them in two and laid each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. So it's like you have an imaginary trail, and you've got half of each of these animals on the trail, on either side of the trail, with a pathway going up between them, and a bird on each side. Verse 11, and the birds of prey came upon the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. Kind of a bad omen of what's going to be revealed here in a few minutes. Verse 12, now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. Again, something bad is going to be revealed. And God said to Abram, now this is in his sleep, he had obeyed God and actually cut these animals up, but now we're in a dream while he's sleeping. And God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. So God is telling Abram something that's going to happen in the future. He's made promises. He's going to have a lot of descendants. He's going to have some land. But now he's telling him there's going to be some bad times, this long period of time where your descendants are going to be oppressed. And we know now, looking back, and we're going to see in future chapters, that this is referring to their enslavement in Egypt. And we'll be reading about that later. Verse 15, as for you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So if Abram asked, well, why is this happening to my people? Why do we have to wait 400 years? God is saying something really interesting here, that the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. The Amorite is going to inhabit this land, and I'm going to take care of them. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to worry about this enslavement that your descendants are going to experience. I'll take care of the Amorites, but only when their iniquity is complete. So it's like God saying, I'm not going to take over until there's no hope for them. Once their sin has gotten so bad that there's no longer any hope for them, then I'll move in and take care of them, and your descendants will be able to move in here. And that's the way God works with nations today, even America. If America gets so bad that there's no longer any hope for America, if the iniquity and sin of America gets so bad, then America will cease to exist in one way or another. So that's what God is saying here. And it came about when the, verse 17, and it came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between these pieces. This is representative of God, and there's different views over what the two pieces are, the flaming torch and oven. So let's say, first of all, it's clear that this is God, but it could be two persons of the Godhead, or it could be two symbols of the same thing. But at any rate, it's God passing through these pieces. Now, back in this time and previously, if someone was going to make a very serious covenant, this is kind of what would be done. You'd split these animals, and the two people involved in the covenant would walk between these animals and basically pledge their covenant, the contract, and they'd basically be saying, if I don't uphold my end of the bargain, my end of the contract, might the same thing happen to me, that I'd be crushed and cut in half and destroyed. Very, very serious ceremony where they are pledging that they are going to meet their ends of the bargain, or let this terrible thing happen to me, just like it happened to these animals. But here, only God walks through. It's a unilateral contract where God is being the senior person. He's going to impose his terms, and he's going to say unconditionally what he's going to do. And verse 18 says, on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenite and the Kenizzite and the Cadmonite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Rephaim and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Girgashite and the Jebusite. This last listing is all the people that were currently inhabiting the land. But God is saying, unconditionally, your descendants are going to have this land. I'm giving this land. Now, Israel has never occupied all of this territory, but God has promised it, and someday they will occupy all of this territory. So these are amazing verses. God has, in a formal, ritualized way, confirmed his covenant to give Abram this land. He's already promised him that his descendants are going to be very numerous. And now in a formal way, he's telling him, you're going to have this land. So now Abram can be very sure of two things. This should have strengthened his faith. That number one, his descendants are going to be very numerous. And number two, that God is going to give him the land that's specified. And it's unconditional. There's nothing Abram has to do. God has said, this is going to happen. This is the way it's going to be. And so he's telling Abram, you can take it to the bank. This is what's going to happen. But Abram still doesn't have an offspring from his own body. And we're going to see what happens next in the following chapter, starting in 16, and we'll talk about that next time. Anyway, God bless. Hope this has been meaningful to you, and we'll continue our study next time. Bye-bye.